Good afternoon, shopkeepers and do-it-yourselfers out there in YouTube land. Today we're working on a 2007 Honda Accord. I don't know whether it's a DX or LX, or there is no, it must be a DX, I think, because it doesn't have the name badge on the deck lid like usually I think they do. Anyway, we're putting the rear brakes on, and so we got the car jacked up and secured, and the wheel took off. I figure you probably already know how to do that. But anyway, we take these two 12 millimeter hex head bolts out of the caliper, and so we can get the caliper off of the mount bracket. And I've already got that one loose, and this one will spin out by hand. I did that to speed up the video a little bit. Then we'll take this one loose down here on the bottom, and look at there, that one, the pin's going to turn. So no big deal. We get a wrench. What's happening is the slide pin, it's a 17 millimeter head. It's turning with the caliper, the mount bolt. We don't want that to happen. You can't get it apart that way. So we'll hold that and then see if I can get, there we go, that'll work. There we go. Now we got it loose. Yeah, still gotta hold it. But those slide pins move in the caliper mount bracket, and if they're seized up, not here but in there, then your caliper won't function properly. Your brake pressure on the rotor won't be applied evenly from the inboard to the outboard. It'll cause excessive heat on the rotor, and it'll cause uneven wear on your brake pads, and loss of efficacy. There's a word for today, efficacy. The efficiency of the brake system on that wheel will not be at 100%. So get that bolt's got a lot of oxidation in it. We'll clean that up and apply just a little bit of anti-seize to it. Then just take these rear brake calipers. Some of them have where the parking brake, you see this spring here, that cam works the parking brake. Your cable's fastened right here, and this cam moves in and out, and that applies pressure on your brake piston. Many rear disc brakes are not set up that way, but this one is, and because of that you got your cable attached to the caliper, so the caliper doesn't move as freely once you dismount it as one would that doesn't have the parking brake on it, and it makes it a little bit stiffer to move. So there, we got it out of the way. But normally you would just have the hose that provide a little bit of rigidness to it, and if the hose is rigid, then you got a problem. But this brake pad, somebody's put brakes, the other side on that over there is wore out metal to metal, but these are not. So it looks like the other side's got a problem. Maybe a caliper's froze up. Now these inboard pads, you see it's got a wear indicator on it. As the brake pad wears, if the pad was this thick, as it would wear, it would get closer and closer, and this piece would actually rub against the side of the rotor, and it creates a screeching noise, and that lets you know that your brake pads are near wore out. See, it's at very little thickness. I don't know if it's focused there, but it's a very little thickness remaining before it gets to the metal backing plate. But that should be on this side of the pad, because you want it to be between the direction of rotation and the pad, so it will touch that first. And so this should be on the other side. And typically you only have one wear indicator on each side, not inboard and outboard, but right and left wheel. And I always put it to the inboard pad and nearest the leading edge of direction. So on the other side, the wheel turns counterclockwise, and so it would be actually up here on the top. But on this side, it should be on the bottom. That's not a fail at this station, but that's where they should go. Towards the opposite the direction. So if the wheel turns clockwise, then it should be over here. If the wheel turns counterclockwise, then it should be up here. So we got them off, and then you got two 14mm head bolts down here on the mount bracket. I've got one of them out already. I've got the top one out. I couldn't get the bottom one, so I took the top one out. And that's tool abuse, but it's mine, so the only thing that happened is my son will inherit a junky wrench, but that's all right. He's probably lost half of what he was going to inherit just playing with him. But anyway, we'll get this bolt out, get this mount bracket taken off, and then we'll talk about the bracket itself, the parts on it, which there aren't many, but you can hear the birds. They're all happy this spring. Nest building. I could have used a ratchet and a socket, but I didn't have one out. Anyway, we about got it. You can fast forward if you're getting bored. And bolts are a little bit kind of dry, corroded a little bit. Anyway, got it off. You got your shims that come. Usually they'll come with your new pad kit. You want to make sure that you don't have a lot of rust checking or caking and corrosion whatnot built up in here. So when you put your new shim on there and your new pad, your brake pad will move freely in the mount. Not that you want it to wobble around, but it has to be able to slide back and forth as the compression is applied to it from the caliper. And when it's released, you want it to be able to move freely in here, so it'll release the pressure applied by the caliper, but you don't want it to flop around. Anyway, aside from the shims, and your brake pad set may not come with those, but I always buy top quality pads, and they do come with these, so we'll take those off. Then you want to check your caliper mount pins, slide pins, that they're free. And I'll just use my thumb and kind of roll that seal back off of there and give that pin a twist and pull it out. And you can see it's a little bit dry. The grease is kind of brown. I will lubricate those up before we put it back on. And some of them have a hard rubber insulator on here that helps dampen the chatter, the frequency of the vibration from the brake, so they don't squeal. But these don't, and if they do, they usually go away from the direction of rotation. So if this one rotates clockwise, the one with the insulator would be this one here. It would be the furthest away from the leading edge of the rotor. But these don't have it, so we don't have to worry about that. Now the piston, you don't just push these pistons in. You don't just grab your C-clamp and mash the piston in. You have to rotate it. Now you can see there that this has got like a cross cut in it. And that's because your pad oftentimes will have, so you got that little pin there, that keeps that piston from rotating. So we get a compressor tool like this, and mine comes, that's the end of it, that's the fastened, the permanent part of the end, and it's too fat, the little dowels are too fat to fit in the grooves of that square, or the channels. So my kit has got different ones of these. I put that on there, and those dowels are smaller than those, so it'll go in there and you fasten or turn that to it's all the way in, slide your backing plate up, and put this in with the dowels perpendicular to your backing plate, and push it forward. I wish I could turn that caliper so you could see. Let me reconfigure myself in the camera. Bear with me. Put a shim there to hold it the right angle. I don't know. Let me see what you guys are looking at. Okay, you can see. So we've got this compressed all the way. We'll put it in there so it's at a right angle of the backing plate. And because you got this anti-rattle pads doodad on there, you kind of got to push up against it to get it to go back far enough. But push toward the piston as you're turning this sleeve, this collar, counterclockwise, because lefty loosey, righty tighty, and that expands the tool so that backing plate is against the caliper, and you're all the way up against the caliper piston there. And because the gearing in here is not going to be the same as here, when you turn this, when you turn it like a quarter turn, half turn, or whatever, stop, and then crank this back again counterclockwise to tighten it back up, because the gear's not, the ratio is not the same. But as you're turning this, you can see the caliper piston is turning, and it's going in, and it's getting loose, so we have to tighten it, tighten that collar up. And when you stop, you want to stop so you're that cross that's cut in there is perpendicular. One of them's right there and the other one's up there on the top. So your pad will go in there square like it's supposed to. And there we go. Like that. You don't want it to, you want it to be like a plus, not like an X. See the plus? There's an X. Get it? Maybe. Now the caliper, or the rotor, usually will have a tapered machine screw in it that holds it in. It holds it onto the, I don't know if you can see me now, it holds the rotor on. Let me look and see what you're looking at now. Yeah, it holds the rotor on. There's one there, and this one went right there. But usually you can't just put a screwdriver on there and get them out, so you have to use an impact driver. And put that up on there and turn the handle counterclockwise, and it'll stop, and then you know you're in position to go. And push toward the rotor, and hit the end of that handle, and that driver will knock that screw loose. And I do not put those back in. Those are only there to hold an assembly together at the factory. One guy might take and assemble this whole knuckle assembly with the rotor, the hub, bearing, and maybe even the caliper, I don't know. But it'll all be assembled, and those bolts go in there just to hold the rotor on while it's in assembly at the factory. After that, once the wheel's on there, there's no way that rotor can fall off, so you don't need them. And if it doesn't have these screws, oftentimes they'll have like a serrated thin metal washer that goes over the stud, and you have to take that off to get the rotor off. Just break it off and throw it in the trash. Well, you can't put it back on anyway because it broke, but you can't get them off without breaking them. But that's all they're on there for. You don't need them on there, so we're gonna throw them away. And if, for purposes that, say you're going to take this off and reuse it, but you're going to replace your bearing hub, you can take a bolt. Let's see if I got one here that fits it. That's a fine thread, and it's coarse. But you can take a bolt and thread in there, and right there opposite, they're like a 5/16 bolt or an 8mm bolt. I'm not talking about the size of the hex head. I'm talking about the size of the shaft. A coarse thread. It's almost like a 15 or a 5/16 coarse. You thread in there, and when you tighten that up, and then you tighten the other one up, and when you alternate back and forth, this bolt comes through this side right there, and it pushes against the flange of the bearing hub, and it will push your rotor off if it's seized to the hub, which is real common, but that's how you get that off. Anyway, so we've got the piston pushed in, we've got the rotor off, and we'll go get some grease, and we'll grease them slide pins, and we'll get this put back together. Hang on just a minute, go get some grease. Okay, let's see. This is my son's car. He went and got me his own parts. These are brake best. I don't even know where they come from. Let's see if these come with the new mount shims. And they don't. They don't come with the new shims. These here that go on the caliper mount bracket. And like I told you about the wear indicators, the little rubbies, you've only got 2 of them. There's 4 pads, obviously, an inboard and an outboard for both sides, but there's only 2 rubbies. And you see, Those two don't have a rubby on them. Those would be outboard pads, and these are 2 inboard pads. So you've got one on this side and one on that side. And this side, we're going to put, this is the one that we took off, but we're going to put this one on. The rubby is on the other side. So when the rotor is turning, the leading edge is going to rub against that. Anyway, I like to use this CRC caliper grease. It's kind of dirty. Let's see if you can wipe it off with his receipt so you can see what product it is that I use. They're not a sponsor. They don't send me any money, but if they sent me a check, I would cash it. I would cash it. I've taken pull those pins out, and you want to make sure and note where they go, because one of them might be longer than the other. Sometimes you might find where one of them's even thicker than the other, so you want to make sure you get them put back in the right spot. But we'll pull that out of there, and I like to use this as opposed to silicone grease because it seems to have a longer life than that silicone grease. Kind of looks like KY jelly. It might be slicker, but it cooks off a lot faster, and depending on how your customer drives their vehicle, if those dry up, that pin's going to start sticking. And I've done thousands of brake jobs, and I've just come to find out that I don't like how that stuff works. So I just push that pin in and give it a twist, and that helps distribute that grease evenly. And when I'm pushing in, I'm turning, and that'll reset that dust seal. And so if it doesn't have that rubber boot on there, that bellow seal, you're going to have problems, because you're going to get road debris up in there, and it's going to start causing a problem with that pin not wanting to move freely. But start putting it in there and just twist it all the way in, so it'll just distribute that grease evenly, and just push as you're twisting, and that'll go right in there. I said I was going to use anti-seize. I'll put a little bit of anti-seize on the stud, but I don't want to use anti-seize on these bolts. I'll just give them a little shot of WD, or I use PB Blaster. I don't know for sure, but I know WD-40 is hyperbolic, where I don't think PB Blaster is. It kind of attracts water, but I'm just going to give a little shot of lube on them bolts, the mount pin bolts, and the caliper mount, the caliper bracket mount bolts. Just kind of wet them down a little bit. This side, he only got me one rotor, so we're going to put this one back on. And you want to check, make sure also, if you got a lot of rust flaking or caking build up in there, that will it puts immense pressure on things. You'd be surprised. If your rotor doesn't fit on flush and snug all the way up against the hub flange, then your wheel is not going to, it may bolt up to the rotor surface flush, but it won't be matching the flange of the hub, and so your wheel is going to wobble when it rotates. So I know these are clean, so put them on there, and we'll get a lubricated mount bracket and put our bolts back in. And those bolts, well, let's check these. That one's clean there. Those bolts, I guess, just, I don't know what the torque spec is on them. I always use German torque specs. You know, good and tight. They're surely not 90 foot-pounds. They're probably somewhere around 35 or 40. Just good and snug. And make sure you get them good and snug so they don't fall out. And you know, brakes are not quite like your windshield wipers. You know, windshield wipers are important, but you're not going to crash if your windshield wiper falls off. But if your brakes don't work, you're probably going to crash. So we'll get these bolts tightened up right quick. And get our little shims put back on the mount bracket. Put the brake pads on. Them bolts are plenty long. I've seen people lose them bolts and they just grab another bolt and put them in. Well, if that bolt's too long, that bolt's going in about like right here. And if that bolt's too long, it's going to go through the bracket and come in and going to be pushing on the daggum on the rotor. And that's not good. Okay. Now we'll get our pad shims put back in place. It didn't look like there's any difference between them shims, top or bottom. Just make sure they're pushed all the way back. Okay. So this one goes to the inside. It's got the wear nubber scratcher on there. Pads in. And the one that does not have a wear indicator goes there on the outside. So your pad moves pretty good in there. And then as you're putting your caliper on, and make sure that your noise vibration dampener shims are not being peeled off, and then push your slide pins inward so your caliper mount ears will go behind them. And then you've got a little bit of spring pressure because of the anti-rattle doodad that goes on the caliper. It's going to push against the back side of the pad. So you got to kind of push inward against that spring pressure. And those should turn in without much trouble from the caliper mount pin, slide pin, because it's lubricated. But if they do, just grab your 17mm wrench and hold the pin while you tighten the bolt. And you want to make sure that you get them bolts tight. Don't leave them loose. They can fall out. I've seen it happen. And the caliper kick up or something. drag against the inside of the wheel, and that's not a good thing. Don't like loose parts on your brakes. That's not good. And when we bleed this, I always bleed them. I don't have nobody pumping them up. I'll just make sure that the master cylinder reservoir is full, and then I'll just take the little rubber boot off of the bleeder valve and put a wrench on there, or a socket, whatever you want to use. This is a 10 millimeter. I can see that. But I'll just, that's tight enough. That's tight enough. I don't use an impact on them because they're just like 5/16. It's not, I guess, 8 millimeter. I'm not a metric guy. I'm not a metric guy. Still don't know what a daggum kilometer is. But I know if you're doing about 55 or 60 kilometers, you're doing 100 mile an hour, something like that. So we got that tight, and I'll go grab a 10 millimeter wrench and okay, 10 millimeter wrench. I go on that bleeder screw. Surely you know what a bleeder screw is, but in case you don't, since this is for the do-it-yourselfer, that's the bleeder screw right there. It kind of looks like a grease zerk, but it's not. I've seen people degrease those. We're just going to take that loose and watch, and you can see fluid. It took a few seconds, but we'll let it drip. Oh, maybe for about 10-15 seconds or so, and if there's any fluid or air in there, it'll come out. This is not the same as flushing, and a vehicle that's got a lot of age on it, you should flush it. My own, personally, every time I service it, I'll crack open every bleeder valve and let them just gravity bleed for 10-15 seconds, and then I'll draw out fluid out of the reservoir and fill it with fresh. So I'm keeping my brake fluid fresh, because as that fluid begins to absorb moisture and break down, it boils at a lower temperature. It's like, I don't know, 400 or 500 degrees. I don't know. I don't remember. But these brakes get hot, and these people come flying up on an intersection. You know, they're 150 feet away from the daggum stop sign, and they still haven't taken their foot off the gas pedal. And they have to stop, and cross traffic doesn't. And all of a sudden they'll take their foot off the gas pedal and slam on the brakes. Well, these things are getting hot. You know, that's what brake pads do. They absorb heat. And I don't know why I tell my children, do not drive like that. You know, people don't think you're going to stop. You know, and they start slowing down, and that slows everybody else down. But anyway, as that fluid ages, the boiling point on it drops, and that's how it gets air in the system. Through, it's a matter of physics. Condensation, it absorbs moisture in the system, so you need to service that now and again. But flushing it would be opening that bleeder and letting it drain for a good little bit. If you don't have a power bleeder like I do, it'll force new fluid through the system, and it'll come out here clean. That's a flush, and that is a good service. It does help cut down on corrosion in your caliper bores, and your wheel cylinders and your master cylinder, and makes your brakes function a lot smoother and more dependable. And if you get into a panic situation, they're not going to blow out because of some issue that could have been prevented. But anyway, we've got that tightened back up, and put the cap back on so that bleeder screw don't get a bunch of crap in it and get clogged up and doesn't function anymore. But I put a little bit of little glob of anti-seize on the studs, and sometimes I'll even put a little bit. I'm working with my left hand here. I'm not left-handed. I'll put a little bit of anti-seize around the hub so the wheel won't stick to it. Sometimes you go to take the studs off, the wheel won't come loose because it's seized onto the hub, and you got to kick the fire out of the wheel to get it to break loose. But it's because of interaction of metal. You got an aluminum alloy wheel on a cast rotor and bearing hub, and it just oxidizes, and they'll stick on there. Sometimes you really got to knock the crap out of them to get them to come off. But anyway, we're just going to go ahead and put the wheel on and fill up the brake reservoir. And after you do these, you need to pump your brake pedal a few times and set your parking brake, set and release your parking brake. That's how these rear brakes that have a parking brake attached to them, that's how that adjusts that caliper piston to take up the slack. You'll have more slack on one that has a used rotor than a new one, because it's going to be a tad bit thicker, not much. This is pretty, I didn't measure this, but I know it's pretty close to what OEM thickness is. That's original equipment material. It's somewhere around 1/4 of an inch or so. That would be 0.250. Maybe closer to 1/3 of an inch. I don't know. But anyway, because when you go, if you don't adjust that up, you go to put it in gear and back up, you're liable to back into something before you get the car to stop, because the pistons aren't adjusted all the way in. So after doing a brake job, always before you move the vehicle, push on the brake pedal about 5 or 6 times. And don't jackrabbit pump on it. Just let's see, like that, because you don't want to aerate the fluid in the master cylinder. You could cause a problem there. So just pump on it at a moderate rate like that, up and down until you get a firm pedal. And on these, you want to set your parking brake and release it a couple times before you pump the brake, and then start pumping on your brake pedal. Use your parking brake lever and set it a couple times and release it, and then pump on your brake pedal. And that's how you get these adjusted out. And anyway, we'll get this wheel put back on, and I'll go ahead and do the other side. There's no point in repeating the process. If you don't know how to do it, just back this video up and watch it again, and just call it the left side. Well, thanks for watching. You guys have a good day. Share, like, and subscribe.